Peace, peace, peace. You are now listening to the voice of Sharif Ali. Welcome to thevault.com. This is The Vault. Just want to thank you for coming in and getting a good dose of how to protect, preserve, and pass on your wealth. We know that if you're going to have something of value, you better keep it in a safe place. That's where you keep it. You keep it in the vault. So thank you for tuning in live. We come on every week, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Just want to thank you for tuning in live. If you would like to search out us, you can find us on Facebook, Sharif Ali. And you would like to listen to the live stream here, you can always listen to the live stream on YouTube at Sharif Ali. Subscribe. And you can always make it a point to listen live. I just want to thank you for listening live. It does mean a lot. I do appreciate it and thank you. I want to start out as we always do, giving praise to the ancestors, to my mother and my father for helping me become the man that I am. I always wanted to present, quality information to people. I do public speaking, Sharif Ali. And I definitely do love helping, individuals protect their estates, using trust and things of that nature. So we're going to start out with today's episode. What is the difference between public and private companies? Very, very important topic because a lot of people know public and private companies from the perspective of if your company is traded on the stock market and has public shares and things of that nature. And I'm not coming at it from that perspective tonight. I'm actually coming at it from the perspective of who is the owner of the entity. You hear about these public corporations, the S Corp, the C Corp, and the LLC. But that's a public entity because it is created on a state level. It's domestic. That's what makes it public. It's public because it's statutory. Okay? So, we need to know, what's private? We need to know that a private entity is someone that has a so-called private owner. It's someone that is considered to be a trust because a trust is a legal person, whether you know it or not. Just like the corporate entity you have is a legal person. So, we're going to go ahead and address these issues as we always do, which is this whole private company, the private corporations. The private corporations are owned by private trust. That's why they're called private. They're not called private because they have a specific group of people and, they haven't been publicly traded on the stock market. That is not the case. Okay, because you can still see that even some of the largest Fortune 500 companies actually have shares and things that are distributed to the public, where they have the average individual investing in the company. No, that is not the case. When it comes to a private company or a private corporation, they're private because they have a private entity such as a foreign trust or a private trust, a common law trust. These are trusts that are in place. And when you research the company, you'll see that a trust actually owns the public S Corp, C Corp, or LLC. People, the next question you're going to ask is why would I actually have that structure in place? Because this is all about structure. Why is it about structure? Because if you own something, you can have it taxed to you. If you own something, you can have it taxed to you. That's why they call you an individual taxpayer. That's why if you have a LLC and you own it, a LLC is a pass-through. The S Corp is a pass-through. The C Corps have shareholders. Okay, so why is it important to create a multi-member LLC, not just the LLC where you're the sole owner, which makes it a sole proprietorship? Why is that important? It's because wherever the money ends up at the end of the day, that entity or that person or individual is tax liable. Period. You can go look this up yourself. I don't need to be a tax attorney for that. I'm an entrepreneur. Okay? I'm not giving legal advice. I'm sharing what is it that successful people use. We use private entities. We use private structures. We have trusts that are in place to own the LLC or the S Corp or the C Corp. Why? Because if you own it, you can be taxed. So it's important to not be taxed on it. It's important to put another entity in place, a legal entity in place that can actually receive the monies. Why is that important? Well, I'm going to give a great example today of how that's very important, especially when it comes to this Google antitrust lawsuit that's going on. I just want to give a big shout out to everybody that's joining me live on YouTube. If you would like to type into the chat and say, hey, that would be awesome, I'll give you a big thanks. And, you can ask questions later on in this episode. You can ask questions as well. So thanks to everybody for tuning in live on the YouTube, and that's greatly appreciated. But back to the private companies, the private entities. You can go look this up. The largest corporations are all private corporations. That means that they have a trust contract in place. A trust is a legal person. Okay? So a trust can own an entity and you can still be the managing member. This is how wealthy people, when you Google, all wealthy people are living by the philosophy of own nothing, control everything. This is how Donald Trump is able to sit in front of you when you say, oh, he's leasing out his name. People always try to go on Donald. Oh, Donald doesn't really own the hotels that, he's putting his Trump name on. You're right. But even still, he said in the race that he didn't have to file a tax return. Why? Because he has a trust in place. His trust owns the Trump name, the family trust. And that name is leased out through the trust. The trust is an individual taxpayer itself. It is a legal entity. It can do business just like Donald. It can buy and sell. That's what makes it private. He has a private contract in place where he's the trustee, but he doesn't tell you he's the trustee. He tells you he's the managing member, or he's he's the controller. He's the CEO. Those are titles that you can take on as a trustee. That doesn't mean that you own it, though. Okay, so not only did he not have to file taxes as a person, why? Because he doesn't own it. Another thing is he has a foundation. All successful, wealthy people have foundations. They have a charitable entity in place, and he still doesn't own that. Why? Because it's a private charity. Same thing with the Clintons. They all have private charities. They don't just have a public entity for public benefit. It's a private entity. Why is it private? Because they have a trust contract in place. They have a trust in place. And it's not a statutory trust. It's not a public trust, one that you go get, and it's under the state laws. It's a private entity utilizing common law. That's what we use, brothers and sisters. That's what I have trustee training for, is to make sure that individuals have trustee training on how to administer private entities. That's the truth. So, to keep this information short and sweet, or to keep it to the point, let's get to the point of this whole private trustee training real quick. It's private because they're utilizing a trust once again, and he is the trustee. They're utilizing contracts and trust in the private sector. That's how you get into the private sector. That's how you get to not being tax liable like Donald Trump. He's the president of the United States. Why are you adverse to the president not filing taxes, but you're so excited to do it? He told you he doesn't have to pay. Mitt Romney, when he was running against Obama, said he didn't have to pay or had to file taxes. Why? Because Mitt Romney's from the state of Massachusetts, which is Massachusetts Trust. You can go look up Massachusetts Trust. That doesn't mean that they're statutory. Statutory means it's public. Private means it's foreign. Private means it's non-domestic. They're not utilizing the state's law. They're using a federal law. They use federal entities. That's the difference. They're private. So own nothing, control everything. That's the philosophy that wealthy people are using. I'm going to go ahead and show you in the public how this is happening. And this is with one of your companies that you think is actually a publicly traded company, such as Google. Google is a publicly traded company on the public side. But guess what? It's a privately held company. And who do you think it's held by? The owners? I'm going to tell you how simple again, as a trustee, you can give yourself a title. The owners of these, they call themselves founders. They're not the owner. Do you see how terminology in law is very, very important? They call themselves the founder of the organization. Why? Because they gave up legal rights of ownership. They gave it up to their trust. Their trust owns it. Elon Musk, the guy that started PayPal, the guy that is running around with PayPal and SpaceX and all these things, he has the Elon Musk Trust. You can Google that. All of the entities such as PayPal are public. It says he started it. But he didn't start it. Hey, how you doing, Tiffany Taylor Hicks? Thank you for tuning in tonight live. Thank you, Conscious Ether, for tuning in live. Want to thank you all for tuning in live. If you have any questions, be ready to type those questions in the chat live. So, once again, Google is in Europe right now. Okay, let me show you how simple these entities, because they're private, I'm going to tell you what they're doing. They're not paying taxes. You want to know why? Because it's called antitrust. They have foreign entities. They can operate in any jurisdiction, particularly foreign jurisdictions that are favorable for common law trust. So let's go over to European Union that is suing Google. Okay, they're suing them at that. They didn't just kick them out of the actual country. They didn't kick them out of the countries or the continent that they're doing business in. Why? Because it's not about this whole propaganda situation of, oh, well, Google, they're not being fair and competitive when it comes to their marketing. They're pushing people down in their marketing. They're not allowing people to advertise, and they have this whole marketing scheme that's not favorable to people that are paying. That is a bunch of garbage. Otherwise, that would be called a business plan fraud. They wouldn't be executing their business plan. Okay? But why didn't they kick them out of the territory for their business plan? Because Google is operating with a trust. There is a private trust that owns Google. They are in a favorable common law jurisdiction, such as Europe, and they are able to do business in that jurisdiction tax-free. So when you look at it, an antitrust lawsuit means that you're generating money in this jurisdiction and you're not actually paying taxes. So let's go back and see what you can see. You can go research this Google antitrust lawsuit. It says that the European Union is slapping them on the wrist for 1.7 or $2.7 billion. You say, oh, that's a lot of money. 1.7, $2.7 billion. Okay, if it's so, peace, Yandel, definitely want to make sure I get the names right. Yandel, peace to you for tuning in live. Thank you for tuning in live. Google, when it comes to this antitrust lawsuit, they are in a jurisdiction generating, for the past 3 years, they generated over $80 billion. I think last year they reported that they generated $90 billion. That's 90, and then there's a B behind it. And the European Union is slapping them on the wrist saying, look, if you're going to be at least generating, 70 to 80 to $90 billion in this jurisdiction, tax-free, because you are a private company, even though it's considered to be a public company, which they're not. They're a private entity that has went out and started a little corporation, S Corp or C Corp. That's perfectly legal. So there's a trust that's operating in the public, perfectly legal. And guess what? The tax liability that's coming from that public entity, they're passing it on to a private entity. And they're passing it on tax-free. Why? Because if Google was smart enough to have a trust, then they're going to have a system of interrelating trust. That's what I coach individuals on, is to make sure that they have their structure correctly. And you got to have your structure correct. Why? Because they're in an antitrust lawsuit, not in an anti-marketing lawsuit. They're not being considered to do the right or the wrong marketing tactics. They're not supposedly being attacked for not fulfilling their marketing plan or their business plan. They're being attacked because they are not paying taxes in Europe right now. Just like in America. If you think that they have an antitrust lawsuit going on in Europe, what do you think they're doing in America? They have a trust set up, and it actually owns all of the little public corporations that are sitting in the jurisdictions of the United States. Why? Because they don't want you to know that they have a trust. That's the same thing with Microsoft. Well, Microsoft was going through their antitrust lawsuit. So you think it was because, they were having an issue in the public with, having all their software and they didn't want any competition. Listen to what I'm getting ready to tell you. This is a quote from Rockefeller. Competition is sin. When you are operating in a trust, you are definitely looking to buy out all of the competition and have no competition. Peace, Brother Stefan. Thank you. Thank you for learning this. Where does one go to learn about starting a business trust? Now, I will address that question, so give me a second. But thank you, Brother Stefan, for tuning in live. So these entities are utilizing trust, which are contracts, private contracts. And I'm going to tell you where you go to learn it. It's real simple. You either learn it from a private family or you learn it from a private community. That's why I do events. That's why I have a community of businessmen that I work with, that you can get invited to our events, and we're looking to educate you on how to utilize these entities, such as a trust. That's very important. You either learn this from a private family, keyword, they're private and they're a family, or it's a private community. They've been instructed, they've been mentored. Individuals that have this knowledge, we're mentored. This is not something you're going to go learn in public school. Keyword, it's public. If everybody was meant to operate this way in the private sector, in the public, then you would have this knowledge already. It would be something that was readily available to you. It's not, for a reason. So you have to learn it from a private family or private community, and that's what I aim to do. Is I aim to put together, communities of people that know how to just administer their life. The information shouldn't be kept a secret, for the simple fact that really you're just dealing with contracts. Trusts are just contracts, whether you know it or not. A trust is a contract. It's a three-party contract. You have a grantor, you have trustees, and you have beneficiaries. Everything's for the benefit of the beneficiaries. Okay, so it's not one of those situations that you're going to go to public school. And you want to know how I know? Because I've been mentored for years. And I went to my mentor and he said, hey, I went to him for years in a row, 2-3 years in a row, before I really focused on the fact that you're right. I'm not going to learn this in a public school. I said, I want to learn paralegal. He said, what's the point? You can hire a paralegal. You're a trustee. I went back to him the next year. I said, all right, I'm going to be an accountant. I got to know accounting on how to account for this trust. He said, you don't need to do that. You need to go and find someone to do that. You're a trustee. What is your role as a trustee? Your role as a trustee is the fiduciary. You are to grow the trust assets. That does not mean you become a worker bee. That doesn't mean you do everything. So I don't want this conversation to get too off the handle about trust, but that is important because the private sector, all politicians are using trust. You heard that from Donald. You heard that from Mitt. And don't think that the Democrats are any different. All politicians are operating in trust. They're utilizing private entities so they don't have to show you their tax returns. And the ones that want to show you their tax returns, they're giving you a small portion of what is it that they're showing you. They don't have to release that information. Why? Because they don't have a tax return to file. Because why? They don't own anything. They control it. So focusing on Google with the antitrust lawsuit that's going on, which I just want to remind you, all your big boys, all your Fortune 500s, let's go through them. Google is one of the big players right now going through it. But you all remember Microsoft when they were supposedly being attacked for a monopoly. You're right. They were gobbling up so much money by having their software in so many computers, and they were not paying taxes, that the government said, look, you have to settle for some millions of dollars. You actually have to pay taxes. I remember when I first talked to my mentor and he said the United States was a tax haven. How is it a tax haven? Why isn't Switzerland just a tax haven? Why isn't New Zealand just a tax haven? Because the tax laws are for people that generate lower amounts of money in those countries. When you know how to structure your affairs correctly, every place is a tax haven. That's why Google is going over to the Europe right now and having a grand time. It's supposed to be an American company, and they're getting hit with an antitrust lawsuit in a country that's not theirs. That's because they're in another jurisdiction getting money tax-free. Antitrust, not anti-marketing. They're a marketing company that's generating billions of dollars by having a private entity own their public entity. And you can do the same exact thing. Right now, if you have a public entity such as an S Corp, C Corp, or LLC, all you have to do is have a trust created. It's real simple. You have a trust created and it owns that entity now. It can come in, you can edit the bylaws or the operating agreement, and it can come in and own the entity. That is how these people are operating. And you think it's wrong? People condemn the 1% for using trust and owning nothing and controlling everything? No, they're utilizing contracts just like you're using contracts. That's simple. The contracts that you are using, they just may not be in your favor. They may be state-created contracts because you're going down to the Secretary of State. When you go down to the Secretary of State to open up a LLC, S Corp, or C Corp, when you go down there to open it up, here it is. When you go down there to open that up, do you actually do you give them your social security number right then and there? No, you do not. No, you do not. You actually put the names of the owners, the organizing members, or the managing members. That's it. But when you go to get that EIN, the employer identification number from the IRS or any other jurisdiction you're in, they're going to ask you what? Who is the legal entity's social or EIN number? Wow, that's the difference maker right there. Because if you're only using your social, then you're liable for all the money that's coming into the entity. But if you have a trust in place, like Donald and all the rest of these politicians and successful and wealthy people, the 1%, what are we using? We're using a trust. You just use the trust EIN. If the trust needs an EIN, it go gets an EIN, and then it owns the LLC, S Corp or C Corp. It's that simple. It's called private structuring, not public structuring. Public structuring means the individual taxpayer owns it. It's that simple. So once again, even Intel went through Intel with the chips. You got to understand, these are not just companies that are doing successful and they're being hit because they're not doing what they say they're doing. They're actually being hit with lawsuits from the government. The government suing them. How's the government suing you? And then not only that, they settle with the government every time. They don't even get hit for all the money they're supposed to pay. The government files a suit and says, can you pay us some money? Because you're helping out the economy by giving people jobs and doing all this good stuff. Well, can't you at least pay a little bit of money? So guess what? That's what's going on in the EU right now. Google's making over $90 billion, and the government in the European Union is saying, look, can you at least give us $2 billion? Like, you're over here generating money. You're actually a large player. We don't want to make you lead the economy because that would make our economy look like trash because companies are not as good as and efficient as Google. So can you at least just pay some money so we can have something for our taxpayer base? That's called antitrust. You all know about Microsoft. Microsoft is in almost every computer that you're touching. What's wrong with that? They marketed themselves to all the companies to get their product put in the computer. People try to say, well, that's a monopoly. You're right, because they're in a trust. And trust, you get rid of all competition. It's sin. They don't believe in fair markets. But they make you believe, oh, yeah, you got to have a public company and have it traded on the stock market. I'm going to tell you what the stock market is for. The stock market is so they can take money out of the public taxpayers' hands and fuel their funding for future projects. And isn't that not true? Don't you give money to a company when you pay for a stock? You're buying a share of the company, but you're giving them money first. Yes, you're giving them money, and guess what they do with that money? They take that money and they use it so they can create new products and actually do new things with it so they can actually improve the company. That's what it's for. It's seed capital. So that's why they have an initial public offering. But guess what? These people have private offerings. You want to know what the private offering is called? You can Google this. It's called founder stock. That's what private entities are dealing with. They're dealing with founder stock. Founder stock is before it's ever even released to the public. There's an initial private offering. Not a public offering. You see how in the public they give you these terms, but they interchange them? The initial private offering is called founder stock. The initial public offering is for you to give them more money and then to actually take that money into the private and do more with it. But guess what? Who is the owner of the company? They're the founder, remember? They didn't say they were the owner anymore. They just found it. Jeff Bezos, he's just the founder of the company now. He's the founder. He's not the owner. He's the CEO. He's the founder and the CEO. He's not the owner. He doesn't file a 1040 tax return. Guess what? Amazon is held in a trust, a private trust. It's able to operate in different jurisdictions internationally. That's the same thing for all your Fortune 500 companies. But everyone sees that it's a private entity. They say, "Oh, it's a private corporation," but you don't know what really is owning it. I'm here to share with you what really is owning it. It's a private trust. It's a private contract because the contract is a legal person. Just like any other entity, your LLC, your S Corp or C Corp, they're all legal persons. Can an LLC buy a house? Can't your corporation buy a house? Can't your corporation buy a car? Can't your corporation buy clothing? Yes, it can do all the things you can do except for vote. That's the same thing for a legal entity called a trust or a contract. It can go and buy and sell property, take out loans, and do all of those things. It can do all of those things like you. Because whether you know it or not, in the public or in business, everything is commercial. It's not personal. You can never be in commerce. That's why you have to have a social security number. Well, guess what? All entities have to have an identifying number. And this is the case with these private entities. They have EIN numbers as well. They have an entity number. And all they do is take ownership rights of all the profits, and that money is being washed away into their private trust. And you never know about it. And people wonder, well, how is it that these companies are able to grow so big and so fast and sit as monuments on top of the common everyday individual? It's because they actually are entities that are called private. They're collecting cash tax-free. Why? Because they know how to make their entities tax exempt. And this is how they do it. It's called practicing tax avoidance. I would like for you all to Google and go to the IRS website and put into the search IRS tax avoidance. When you put in IRS tax avoidance, the first thing you're going to read is they immediately address tax evasion. There is a clear difference between tax evasion and tax avoidance. When you look further into the IRS says it's an abuse of tax avoidance. That's what's going on with Google right now. They are being hit with an antitrust lawsuit because there's an abuse of tax avoidance. They're not paying taxes, so the government's like, well, can you at least pay some taxes? Can't you give some money to the people? That's what's going on. They're practicing tax avoidance, which is perfectly legal. People say, oh, well, what's the difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion? Evasion is where you have a liability and you don't want to pay, and you're trying to evade it. It's already been assessed. Well, guess what? If you have a situation, this is it. It's called the structure. You have to have your structure correct. When you have your structure correct, you can actually be in any entity and do business in the public. You can have a private trust because your structure is correct on the back end, on the private side, because the private comes before the public. You can have your private entity own a public entity. Why? Because it's a legal person. Just like it can own a house or a car or anything else, you can do the same exact thing. You're welcome, Dark Eagle 405. You're welcome. So you have to have your structure correct. When you have the proper structure, tax avoidance is definitely the best practice to have in place. It's not evasion. Then guess what? You don't have to think about being held in court. People say, well, what's the benefit of having a trust in place? First of all, if you want to sue Jeff Bezos, he probably doesn't own anything. So in turn, you're not going to get Amazon. You think he's so smart to build $1 billion company and you can sue him for $1 billion? No. So everyone that you see that's in the public that's running around and they have everything in their name, they are liable for a lawsuit and any other type of tax situation. Why? Because they own things. Ownership incurs tax liability. Ownership incurs liability. So if someone wanted to sue you, guess what? They can subpoena your assets. You're not supposed to own it. You're supposed to control it. That's the difference. That's the issue. You think you can sue Oprah? Oprah doesn't own anything. I've seen her tax structure. She has a foundation in place. I keep reminding you all that all wealthy individuals have foundations in place. It's that simple. So they have a trust in place and they also have a foundation. Why? Because if their trust incurs a tax liability, they actually receive a tax deduction for giving the money away to their foundations. Do you hear me? They give their money away from the trust, the business trust that may incur a tax liability on the private side, and actually give it away to a foundation. That's called washing your money away. And people say, oh, it's illegal. No, that's called tax avoidance. So here's the issue, is how do you get into this situation for yourself? How do you get into this situation? Here you go. Once again, where do you learn this information? You learn it in a private family or in the private community. Why? Because if you're in the public, you're a liability. You own everything. And you almost even control it. But you really don't control it in the public. Why don't you control it in the public? Because the government controls it. Because you have you have to go to them to actually apply to do anything. In the private, there's a contract set up in place. And here's where these individuals are utilizing the law. See, people think that these people are lawless people. I'm going to share with you the law that they're using. And this is the law that you have to gain confidence and stand by. You're welcome, Tiffany Taylor Hicks. The law that you have to stand by is Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution and every other subsequent state's constitution except for Louisiana. Louisiana does not run off a common law. They don't run off of contracts in that respect, so you have to look further into their law. But here we go. Article 1, Section 10, in part, no state can impair the obligation of contracts. No state can abridge the right to contract. That means whatever's in the contract is a binding agreement. It's the binding law. Once again, a trust is a contract. It's a three-party contract between the grantor, the trustees, and the beneficiary. Where do you go to learn this information? You learn it from a private family or a private community. That's why I make it a point to do events. If you would like to get in contact with me, hfrn.vault@gmail.com. Once again, hfrn.vault@gmail.com. And you can focus on privacy. As you all can see, you don't need to see my face. People think, oh, I need to see you on the YouTube and all this other good stuff. How about I like maintaining my privacy? But the reason why I'm doing this is because I understand that in business, guess what? The United States Constitution says no one can impair the obligation of contracts, so let's create a contract. I want to do business with people that understand how not to be a liability, to own nothing, control everything. To utilize these trust entities to do the same exact thing Google's doing, to do the same exact thing Mark Zuckerberg's doing. He just did it with Facebook. You all can look at it more up to date. You all can go look. This is the facts. Facebook is a privately held company at this point. It is owned by a private trust. Yes, it is a public corporation. Why? Because the public corporation that has the shares that are distributed to the public, it's owned by a private entity. He's just what? Listen to what he's called again, the founder, the CEO. Okay? And guess what he just recently created? He created a foundation. He created a so-called nonprofit entity. So all of his profits now that he's supposedly supposed to use to God, that's where are they going now? They're going to his private entity, to the private family foundation that he has. That's the facts. He created a foundation, the Zuckerberg Foundation. So, as you all can see, there's many instances and examples of the difference between what a public corporation is. A public company. And what's the difference between a private company and a public companies? Are the fact that, hey, public companies have individual taxpayers owning them. You're using your social. You're liable for everything. A private entity has usually a private contract, a private trust in place. It's just that simple. And that trust, because of the way that it's drafted and things of that nature, it gives the opportunity for these individuals to not have to be liable for anything. Even Steve Jobs was hit with the antitrust. You all can Google that Steve Jobs set up multiple trusts from the Pixar and Disney. You all can Google. Just put in keywords, Steve Jobs, trust, and Pixar and Disney. And you literally will see how he set up trust for each of his children to receive money from these companies that he created. Why is that important? Here it goes, brothers and sisters. When they created the tax law, anything you own can be taxed to you. So if you have money coming to you in your name, when you pass away, it's going to go through what's considered probate or estate tax. It means you're going to be taxed out of your wealth. Well, guess what? If you have it in a trust, you don't own it. So when you pass the money along, or when you pass away, the money's inside of a trust. All your children do is step right in your place. So you're passing on wealth tax-free. That's what these wealthy people are doing. They're passing on wealth tax-free. It's just that simple. That's why you see the Rockefellers be able to hold and build wealth successively generations. That's why you see the Kennedys. The Kennedys are set up the same exact way. I keep mentioning to you all that politicians are set up this way, brothers and sisters. They're all set up with private entities, just like Donald. Donald said, I don't own it. I don't have to pay for it. My companies file taxes, and this is what they do. My companies do it. Yeah, he can say his companies, but he doesn't own the company. The trust owns the company. The family trust owns it. They know how to deal in contracts. That's why I do trustee training. Because you have to learn how to be a trustee, not just the owner, not just the CEO. You have to be the trustee. That means you don't own it. That means you control everything, though. You control all the assets. You have to give up all control of your assets and put them inside of, an entity and give up ownership. So you're not liable anymore. Because if you're liable, you can be sued for it. If somebody slips and falls at your house, they can sue You, or they can sue the owner of the house. Well, if the owner of the house is a trust, all they're going to get is the insurance policy. It's that simple. You have to have your affairs structured in the correct manner, especially if you're looking to do business like Google and accumulate wealth like Google. Google's generating $90 billion and being hit on the wrist for $2 billion. That's nothing. It's up to you whether you want to have your structure like this. So, if you would like to know, I am the private family building a private community. You can come into that community. We're inviting individuals to learn how to operate correctly. Is anything wrong with this? No. You can go on the IRS website and they will tell you that tax avoidance is perfectly legal. Tax evasion is the problem. And when you're evading taxes, you best believe they're going to come down on you like a ton of bricks, like Lauryn Hill and Wesley Snipes. But did you notice that a lot of other nationalities and successful Fortune 500s don't get hit on the wrist with those liabilities? They just get hit with an antitrust lawsuit. They get hit with it. And it's literally the EU asking them to pay $2 billion or $1 billion. They're asking them. They're not forcing them. Why? The case has been going on for 7 years. Same thing with Microsoft. It was going on for almost 10 years. If you are evading taxes, you best believe they're coming out on you quickly because they're practicing tax avoidance strategies, which means that we have to really find a way to make you pay something. So now they're propagating in the public, well, hey, you're not fair to the competition. So we're going to put out that you're not fair to the competition. You're not advertising people properly. You're not being fair and competitive in a fair competitive marketplace. You're right. They have a trust. They're not going to. So at this point, I'm going to address some questions. I want to thank everybody for tuning in live. Conscious Ether, everyone that's tuning in live, thank you so much. And everyone that listens to this in the archives, I appreciate you all. I'd like to give a shout out to everybody that's emailed me to get into private trustee training at hfrn.vault@gmail.com. It's been a pleasure and honor to work with you all. I know that you all listen to the live episodes and episodes in general. I thank you, everybody, for sharing this with your friends and family. This is how you build a community. You actually have to have everyone in trust. Why? Because it creates transparency. Now it's not your money. Now I can't steal the money. We can't steal and embezzle company funds. My buddy can't steal and steal company funds because guess what? It's the company funds. It's not my funds. It's not his funds. So we're going to address some questions. Someone asked, when are the events? We actually just had an event recently in New Jersey that I spoke at with my private wealth strategist. He deals with more of the financing, and I deal more with the structures. And we also bring in individuals that deal with precious metals to make sure that your portfolio's right with these private trusts and things of that nature. So it's very important for you all to utilize these entities and use them to the maximum benefit. And there's so many more benefits, but financing the structures are very, very important. You want to get into the entity and actually know how to finance the entity from a private perspective and not using your social. So many people are used to doing personal guarantees with their social that when you get into a private trust situation, you actually need to know how to use and finance these entities, and that's very, very important. So, we just did an event in Newark, New Jersey, great event, and we're looking to do another event here, most likely either back in the South here with the individuals that I'm working with, or we're going to do it out in the Midwest or even possibly in California. So just get on the email list. I encourage everybody to get on the email list at hfrn.vault@gmail.com, and then in turn we can go forward from there. So we'll definitely go from there. Someone else asked the question, what about the Wise Concise Trustee Handbook? That's a PDF. You actually can Google it. Wise is spelled WEISS. Concise Trustee Handbook. It's a good trust handbook. I definitely don't disagree with it. But once again, I share with individuals, look, when you get into a private trust, you're either given that information from a private family or a private community. There is pieces of information that will never make the public internet, period. And I know that because I utilize the information. And I know I've never seen some of the information that we utilize on the public platform. And why would we? That would be a compromise to us that is private. Do you see how there is a conflict of interest to actually have all of your information that's private in the public platform? Why? Because the public is considered the welfare state. They're not considered to have knowledge of maintaining privacy. The focus of the public is to do for everybody. Well, in the private, it's not to do for everybody. It's to do for your last name, for your private people, to maintain your privacy. Why? Because the government is public. Private is an individual family. So that's why you see the Trumps, they have a private family trust. The Bezos have private family trust. The Zuckerbergs have a private family trust, a private family foundation. They're all private. They understand how to maintain privacy through contracts. Article 1, Section 10. So I definitely say that wise, concise trustee handbook, that trustee handbook is good in a respect that it's good for public trust. It does if you had a public trust, it would be good to deal on that level of public, learning how to administer public trust, because there are statutory rules to public trust. But private trusts are more focused on the contract itself, whereas the public trust, they're created under the jurisdiction of the state. You don't want to deal that way, and if you do, have fun with that. But like I say, the private aspect, the private sector, the information comes from knowing the right that you just have the right to contract, and you can utilize that right to contract privately. And that's coming from Article 1, Section 10. And guess what? The Constitution doesn't give you rights. It protects your rights. So very, very important. Generational wealth. Yes, this is very important for generational wealth because if you don't have a trust in place, then you're gonna get your estate's gonna get hit with probate. Very, very important. So you want to be able to own nothing but control the assets and pass them on in a manner that is actually conducive, and that's very fine. Someone said, "Why is it difficult to get people of color to subscribe to these practices?" I would say that just because they don't know. That's coming from Tiffany Taylor Hicks. That's coming from the fact that they don't know. A lot of people don't trust the law that's in place, and the law is really to protect you. It's not to control you. And I understand that we all been given a public school education. If you've been given a public school education, what are you going to do? You're going to be acting like a public citizen. Well, guess what? There are people called private citizens. We understand how to maintain our privacy. Period. So it's just educating individuals on learning how to utilize contracts, because you already are dealing in contracts every day, whether they're verbal contracts or whether they're written or expressed on paper. So it's not necessarily the fact that it's just difficult. It's just we have to overcome the challenge by educating them on the actual contracts itself, understanding what contracts are, how to maneuver in contracts, and not be adverse to contracting. We should be okay with contracting. I remember doing business with certain people of color and people in general sometime, and they'll be like, no, we don't need to do a contract. We can just agree on it through our word. I agree, but that's all called a verbal contract. That's implied. Okay, so we are always dealing in contracts. There's nothing wrong with that. So that's very, very important. Someone else said, can you set up a trust before I have any assets to add to it? This is what I was talking to someone earlier in a business meeting. He's actually a banker that I do business with, and he wants to do business with a trust. And it's funny because he kept asking that kind of question, like, well, do I have to have assets in before I set up a trust and get in trustee training? And I said, no, you are the asset. You want to protect your greatest asset. You want to put yourself inside of a trust, so in case someone sues you, then there's something that owns you. What owns you right now? You think the United States owns you? That's a form of slavery. No one can own you. You have to have entities that protect you. So yes, a trust can protect your assets. And so it's very important to have that entity put in place, because I told him, I was like, well, aren't you generating wealth right now? Aren't you working right now? Doesn't your family have a house? Doesn't it have a car? All of those assets, those things need to be placed inside of a private entity, period. A private contract. They need to be placed in there. Why? Because if someone comes after you now and sues you now, then guess what? You're liable, and they can take everything from you. They can freeze your bank accounts. Well, guess what? If you don't have a bank account and the trust has a bank account and is doing everything taking care of you, then they don't have a contract with that entity, the person that's suing you. They have a contract with whoever they have a contract with. So it's very important to put yourself in the right position, the correct structure. Someone asked when we're going to be back in the Jersey area. Like I say, just get on the email list at hfrn.vault@gmail.com. That's where we update our trustees in training and individuals that are looking to be a part of the trustee training. Very, very important. Someone asked, is there a certain amount of business a certain amount that your business must be making before structuring it as a trust. I definitely would say no. I mean, if you make $1, you can be taxed and sold for that $1. You can have your assets frozen for the $1. So you don't want to have the $1 anymore. You want everything to be placed inside of a trust. See, that's the challenge, is you're already dealing in contracts. You're already dealing in assets. The only difference is do you own it? Because if you own it, you are liable. But you have to put yourself in a position where you control it and you don't own it. You don't want to own anything. But hey, not everybody's been brought up with this thought process or philosophy. Like I said, it's shared through private families or private communities. So the structure is not based off of how much you have. It's based off of a mindset. Why? Because you want to start out owning nothing, controlling everything. You want to start out that way. So everything that you so-called receive, you don't own. It just goes straight into the actual trust structure. Same thing with Google. They have the structure set up in place. So they can now call themselves the founders and the CEOs. And it's so simple. Even if you have a public entity already in place, such as a corporation, even if you have an entity that is in the public, such as your corporate, if you have any public entities, it's very simple to go into the bylaws or the operating agreement and change the so-called owner. It's very simple. It's not challenging. You can keep doing that. It's very simple to do that. You can go into that structure at any time and say the new owner is a private trust structure now. It's not hard. So just to make you all aware of that, the next event, Dark Eagle 405, we're still working on that. We usually do events every 60 days because we do have a great amount of trustees enrolling in trustee training, and that's what's important. It is about getting into a trust and the trust structure, but it's knowing how to administer the trust and actually protect yourself and preserve the assets, and then as well grow the assets within the entity. So it's very, very important. I mean, you all can go to some type of public school and learn how to do it with a public structure, but we're talking about dealing with it from a private structure. And private structuring comes from private families or private communities. Greg Clark, thank you for tuning in live. He says, asset protection, estate planning for your benefit while you're living. And that's another thing. A lot of people think that they're getting into a living trust structure, and that's not what we're talking about here. A living trust structure means that you still own it. That's very clear. You can go and look up what a grantor trust or a living trust structure looks like. That's why I tell you all, you have to learn this information from either a private family or a private community. Why? Because Donald's not in a grantor trust. Donald Trump's not in a living trust, okay? He's in a private trust structure. That means the entity's been set up to where he didn't start it. He just controls it. Okay, so it's very important for you to understand structuring. And once again, you get that from a private family or a private community. So just to put you all on notice, that's a very important point. A lot of people know that there's many different types of trusts, asset protection trusts. A lot of these things are for estate planning and things of that nature because you want to be able to pass on wealth. And once again, this is called tax avoidance, not tax evasion. You can go look that up. When you come into the private, you can actually get court cases that we share with you that share with you private court cases about how the government was not able to sue private entities. Why? Do you see what they're doing with Google? They're asking them for money. They're not taking money. They're asking. If the government was so powerful, they would just shut Google down. That's what they would do. But they're not, because they have the structure set up correctly. That's why. So it's very important to, you either enroll in private trust structure training or you keep operating the way you are, and you think that it's your duty to go out and pay taxes every year when Donald Trump, the president of the United States, said, hey, I'm not even paying taxes. That's because he has his structure correct. So it's incumbent upon you to either follow suit in this so-called great American country, or you can go around complaining saying it's evil and it's corrupt, when in all actuality, he doesn't own anything. So why would he have to file? He doesn't own anything. He controls it, though. He controls the Trump name. He controls the Trump legacy. He does it through trust, and he does it through foundations, like all wealthy people. So I'm getting ready to hit close to an hour here. If you have any additional questions, you all can put another question into the chat. I think the comments in the chat have just been awesome. We will do this every Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. 7 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Pacific. And you all can, email me at hfrn.vault@gmail.com. And if you want to enroll in private trustee training, we can go over that from there. If not, If not, then we can all focus on just making sure that I'll address your question, Greg Clark. Give me 1 second, but we definitely want to encourage you all to focus on that. And real quick, one that is emailed for the non-disclosure agreement, we're going to be sending out another non-disclosure agreement to you all. What is a non-disclosure agreement? An NDA. That is just a document that protects, if you're sitting in front of someone, to say you will not walk away from this conversation and share anything that we're dealing in. That's very, very important, is for people not to walk away and steal your intellectual property. That is what the private side is focused on. It's protecting intellectual property. You have to have a non-disclosure agreement when you're sitting in front of people sharing your idea. It's called having a non-disclosure agreement. So just to address an additional question that Greg Clark has, he says unincorporated business organizations. Yes, unincorporated business organizations. That is the entity that they call it. See, the thing about a trust is they can't put a title on it. Why? Because it's a contract. So they can call it a Massachusetts trust. They can call it a common law trust. They can call it an unincorporated business trust. They can call it a business trust. When you go look at the IRS website, it tells you that they don't have a specific name for these entities, but they do honor the contract. They honor the contract because they're under the Constitution. So I just want to thank Tiffany Taylor Hicks and a nonprofit networking cafe. A lot of people think that nonprofits such as foundations are all public. They think those entities are all public entities created under their statutory jurisdiction. That is not true. You all can Google private family foundations. And then we can go a little bit further in that when you get in private trustee training. Why? Because there's different type of private family foundations. But that's reserved for individuals that are a part of the private community that I've been able to put together, and I want to continue to grow. But on the back end of that, because we do good in our private trustee training. So once again, for Conscious Ether, if you want to get into private trustee training, it's hfrn.vault@gmail.com. Contact Sharif Ali. We do have a team in place. We do trustee training. We want to make sure everyone is administering their entities properly. And that comes from experience. You have to learn from a private family or a private community. So I just want to thank you all for tuning in live. Please share this with your friends or family, because I know that you might have a hard time just getting them into the information. So share it from where you got it from. That's what I did. I went into this type of mentality and structuring with my family. My family is a part of the private trust structuring. You have to be a part of it in a communal manner because it creates transparency. Now it's not focused on your money or my money. It's focused on our money. It's focused on the trust money so we can further the money for the next generation. That's why you see all wealthy people work together in trust structures. Berkshire Hathaway's working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They're all working together. Why? Because they're not a liability to each other, because they're all trustees. They're not just public citizens. They're trustees over trust. That's why they get hit with antitrust lawsuits. So I just want to thank you all for tuning in live. It's been a pleasure. Everybody that tuned in live, everybody that listens to the archives, share this with your friends and family. I do like to hear from you. If you want to contact me on Facebook, HFRN, on Facebook, Sharif Ali, SHARIFALI on Facebook. And we can build from there as well. Subscribe to the Vault on Facebook. The Vault is the name of the page, and you all can see previous episodes that I've recorded on trust structuring or private structuring or business structuring, because those things are important. Like I say, tax avoidance is perfectly legal. Tax evasion is completely illegal. And I don't need to be a tax consultant to know that. You all can go to the IRS website. That's where you're going to get your business EIN number if you're doing business legitimately, and it tells you that that's perfectly legal and what's perfectly illegal. So you all can find out that. I do appreciate you all. I love what I do. I love everybody that listens and shares because it's about community. It's time for individuals to take control into their private families, not be focused on the public environment. The public is bankrupt, brothers and sisters. You clearly hear that. How are you expecting them to give you any quality knowledge? You have to go to the private sector and start educating yourself and your family from the private sector. I thank you all for tuning in live. Thank you so much, and peace